Hey Blender friends, this is Daniel Grove. Thanks for checking out this video. In this one, I'm going to break down materials, textures, procedural, UV mapping, all that fun stuff that you got to learn early on in Blender in order to make cool stuff. So let's start off with defining a few terms so that we can be speaking the same language and you can learn this stuff much easier with less confusion. Okay, first term is material. I just added my default cube back. I'm going to go to my materials tab right here, materials properties actually, and I'm going to click new. I have just created a material. Previously, this cube did not have any material. It would render as just a blah white cube with shading and shadows, of course, but now I have a specific material and I can alter that material by giving it a surface color. Now, although I did change my base color, I don't actually see any change. That's because my viewport is not in material or rendered view. It's in object view. So I'm going to go to the third option here, which is material view. If I go to the fourth one, that's the full on rendered, and I'm using Eevee right now, so it doesn't look terribly amazing. But I'm going to go back to the material preview view, and now I can see any change I make to the surface color. I can also add metallic properties to this surface, which again is not doing much because I don't have really a environment to reflect. I can turn down roughness. All these things are properties of the material that I have applied here. A material can have a name. You can have multiple materials per object. I'm going to give this one a blue color and then make another one, give it a red color. Now you're thinking, well, hold on, I don't see any blue or red. That's because the first material has been applied to all six faces of this cube. The other materials are not being have not been mapped or UV mapped to any specific piece of the cube. I will actually cover multiple materials on a single mesh as well as multiple textures within a single material later. Don't worry, we'll get to that. So that is the basics of what the word material means. Now within a material, we can have textures. Textures are generally images, but they can also be procedurally generated images. Again, we'll get to that later. Don't worry. Here I'm going to open up this sci-fi metal hull image, and I'm going to use an image node plugged into the base color. So instead of it having the green base color that it had before, now it has a texture plugged in to those coordinates. Let me turn the roughness back up so we can see a little bit easier. There we go. We got a sci-fi cube because the material has an image texture plugged into base color. Now, all these inputs right here can have image textures or procedural textures plugged into them. And that would be a PBR shader. So a PBR shader is a material that has multiple images being used for the different aspects of what the material is supposed to look like. For specular, roughness, metallic, even normals and bump. We'll get to that later. Don't worry. We'll also talk about unwrapping a cube so that you can get the most out of your texture and put the texture on any 3D surface the way you want it to go. Okay, so that's textures. All right, let's talk about procedural textures. So I just deleted that image texture with the UV mapping nodes that connected to it, and I'm going to create a moose grave. If I plug this into the base color, we'll get this computer generated noise pattern. Now, the moose grave node itself has lots of options, which will change how the texture looks. We've of course got scale. You can add detail to it. You can add different types of finer detail to give different looks, such as rust, dirt, clouds, all kinds of stuff. Now, procedural textures are awesome because of a few different reasons. First of all, it's not using any image file, which means it's not accessing a file on your hard drive. And because it's not using an image file, it can be scaled up or down infinitely. Just like a vector file doesn't actually have pixels, it has location points that use math to tell the software how to render it. Procedural textures are kind of similar in that they are calculated with math and they give you control so you can change how it looks. So no matter how much I zoom in or no matter how large my mesh is, I can apply procedural textures and not run into any resolution issues, no pixelation, anything like that. All right, next term is UV or UV mapping. If we change this view to the UV editor right here, and if I go into edit mode of my mesh, select all the faces, look at this. We see this cross shape. What is this? Well, this is basically the cube default unwrapped using the cube method. And if I make sure that these two arrows are selected, any face I click on the mesh shows me where the face is on this texture space, which doesn't have an image loaded. So if I load an image like this one, which has a whole bunch of sci-fi graphic user interfaces that I created, you're going to see these parts of the image come through on these specific faces, assuming that I have this image file actually connected to the material in the BSDF shader. So let's go back to shader editor and let's make that connection. So right now it still has my procedural noise going into color. Let's delete that. Press Shift A, click search, and just type in image. Okay. And because this image has already been loaded into this Blender file, we can actually select it from here. So there's that. Plug it into the base color, and voila, we've got our sci-fi UIs plugged onto these different faces. Now, it doesn't look great because these faces are not really well mapped. They're not fit to each of these small computer screens. I can easily do that by moving the face in the UV editor. So with this bottom face selected, I can use G to move it on top of this computer. I can even press S to scale it, and if it's at a weird direction, I can rotate it. Or to be exact, R90 to rotate 90 degrees, so on and so forth. Let's map this one. Here's a shortcut. If you have a face selected but you don't see it, press the period key and it will automatically move your view over to where that face is. So G for move, put it over this computer screen, and S to scale it down, make it fit nice. Okay, let's grab this top one and do the same thing. We can move it over here, center it, zoom it in. There we go. So we have just manually mapped these faces to those computer screens that I wanted to be on those faces. There's lots of automatic UV unwrapping methods. Let me zoom out so you can see what they do. If I go into tab mode with this cube selected, press A to select all the faces, then press U, I have a bunch of options here. We've got unwrap, which doesn't do anything right now because it's already unwrapped. Let's try the next one, U smart UV project, and press OK. It just kind of fills up the space as much as it can with these faces. Next popular one is cube projection, which I believe they're all laid on top of themselves. So we have the same image, copy it on every face because every face is on top of itself. It's mapped to the same thing. Let's try the next one, U cylinder projection. That looks really terrible because this is definitely not a cylinder. So not a great example. And the other one, of course, is not going to look great either because we only have 6 faces here. There's also project from view, which look at this. It literally projects the faces from my view right here. If I change my view and do this from here, from view, look at that. Now this is really great. If you have, let's say, a 3D scene like a hallway or a wall created, you have the perspective matched to an actual image over here, you can stick this flat image onto the 3D space and then you can move around in 3D and it's really cool. Now if you press reset, it will unwrap all the faces on top of themselves and fill up your image space completely. Let's try a different shape. Let's delete that cube. Let's add a cylinder. We're going to keep it with the basic 32 vertices there. Now notice this cylinder does not have any materials, right? Every time you make a new mesh, it's empty. So we can select from the previously created materials that are still in this Blender files memory from here. Here's the cube one with the computer screens on it. Now what I like to do when I'm unwrapping cylinders is to grab this outer edge without the top or the bottom and make sure that it looks like this. All the sides next to each other, because that's how they are on the cylinder, right? They're next to each other. Now, with all these faces selected over here, you can still scale them. You can scale them all the way all together. You can scale them on the Y to make it smaller, which then stretches the texture, as you can see down below. If you size it up big time, watch what happens. The texture will begin repeating itself over and over, because in this gray zone outside of the actual image, it's really just this same texture repeating over and over and over, down, left, right, and top and bottom, infinitely, right? So in case you were wondering what happens in the gray space, well, that's what the image will repeat. If I move my UV mapped faces into the gray area, they're still showing the image, but it's the tiled repeating image on the edge. Okay, let's go back. Similarly, I can scale on the X, which will then stretch it left and right and add a whole bunch of copies like that. And of course, we have the caps, the top and the bottom circle, which are seen here. Let's shrink these down and put them on a face that is somewhat circular. So this design right here is kind of a circular design. And this one, we'll put that on this crazy looking star chart that I made right there, which is the top face. Cool. Now it's not perfectly centered, so I'm going to press period. I'm going to zoom in really close. And if you notice, this face has a little orange dot right in the middle. It's hard, it may be hard for you to see, but that is the center of the face. So I'm going to move that to the center of this crazy design I made. And voila, it is centered and it looks awesome on top. Bottom, we got a black hole, gravity readout. Don't ask me. I actually made these for another project I did last year. Okay, so that's the basics of some very basic shape unwrapping. Now let's make a soda can. That's a really good, easy to understand project where we're going to learn how to unwrap something and stick a label around a soda can. So with our shape deleted, Shift A, let's make another cylinder. Let's give it some more vertices so it'll be a little bit smoother. I'll say 80. Let's go into tab mode, SZ, make it a little bit taller. There we go. Now the tops and bottoms of a soda can have a little bit of a bevel. So I'm going to select that top and bottom, zoom in a little bit, plus sign, and Control B. Now this will only work if you have the Bool Tools add-on enabled in the preferences. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to grab the top face, press I for inset, just a little bit of an inset there. Let me zoom in, show you what I'm doing. I'm going to press E for extrude. I'm going to move my mouse down, S to scale it in a little bit. There we go. All right, we're going to pretend like this is a great soda can, even though it's not really. We can smooth out these edges. If you zoom in, you can still see these 80 faces that we added around the cylinder. We can make that automatically smooth by pressing W, choosing Shade Smooth, and then go down to this little triangle, which is the Object Data Properties. Go to the Normals and check Auto Smooth. There we go. So that way the sharp edges that are more than 30 degrees are sharp. Everything less than that, which is this round, going around the circle, that is all auto smoothed. All right, let's give this a material. Let's go to your materials tab, click new, type in soda can, and let's scroll down a little bit and let's increase metallic all the way up, specular all the way up, and roughness. Don't go too shiny because this isn't a chrome cylinder, right? Aluminum is kind of a brushed, blurry aluminum. So we'll keep it somewhere around the halfway point. All right, now let's add a soda label around the middle. But before we do that, let's decide which faces we're going to use. So go back into tab for edit mode, press Control R, click, and then you can drag this to the top. This is going to be the piece where the wrapper is going to be applied, or the graphic. Control R again to make a loop cut, click, and drag down. Go. So we're going to leave a little gap that still will be silver metal on the top and on the bottom. But the centerpiece, let's go to face mode. If you hold Alt or Option on Mac and select these faces, for me it's right click. It may be left click for y'all, depending on your preferences. It will grab the entire, circumference of these faces. So that's what we want. In our Materials tab, we're going to do this the easy way. Add another material, click New, name it Soda Label. Okay, we got Soda Can, which is metallic, and Soda Label, which will be the graphic. Now I went to Google Images and I found my favorite soda, which is, of course, Sprite. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with Sprite, let me just let you know it's awesome. It's better than Coca-Cola and Pepsi. You can fight me. All right. So with our BSDF shader visible here for the soda label material, make sure you're in the shader editor to see this. I'm going to do Shift A, search, IM for image texture. There it is. I'm going to click open and I save this to my pictures folder. I think, oh, it's in my download folder actually. There it is, Sprite, open. And I'm going to plug it into this guy. Now we're not done yet. We actually need to attach this second material to these faces because right now everything is still soda can material up here. So with our faces selected, click on the second material and click assign. There we go. This looks like crap, but it's okay. We're going to use the UV editor to fix this all up. Zoom out a little bit. Give us some space up top. Change this from shader editor to UV editor. There. And we need to change our image to the soda can image. There we go. Zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. Okay. Okay, so now we have these faces selected, and this UV editor is showing us all the other faces we don't really care about, like these top rims, the top and bottom of the can. So to clean this view up, let's turn off these two arrows, which is the link option. Now we only see this faces that we had selected right here, the part for the label. So press A, and let's move this down. GY, just moving down on the Y, SX to scale it along the X axis. And we only want it to cover up the actual label. This image has a white border, which I don't care about. But that's okay. We can use, the UV editor to only map what we want mapped to this part. Okay, now we need to stretch this up and down. So SY. Oh, it's almost there. It's coming to life. Look at that. Get out of edit mode by pressing tab. And voila, we have our soda can. The mesh shape is not exactly like a soda can, but you get the point. This is for educational reasons only. And please don't sue me, Sprite. Actually, just send me some freebies. And there you go. You've got a UV mapped image label onto a soda can using two materials. Now, sure, I could have added this image texture to my metal soda can material and done like masking and alpha channels and all that, but that's just a little bit more complicated, especially if this is your first real tutorial on how to use UV maps. I just kind of like to use two materials to keep things clean and separated. And if we want to change them at soda can, we can easily do that by playing with these things. We can, add some crazy color to it. We can change how shiny it is or how blurry it is, turn the highlights down, the metallic down, make it plastic. You have lots of control. And you can also go to your image label and you can make this shiny as well by turning down your roughness, turning up your specular. There we go. We can see some glossiness there. Okay, so we're done with the sprite can. Let's move on to talking about more complicated meshes and how they are UV mapped with textures on them. All right, I imported an object here that I downloaded from sketchfab.com. This is by an artist named Polenta, a beautiful starship called the Raven Crest. I really like the shapes and the details going on here. So, this is a great example of a mesh that is complex and has a complex texture. So, you're probably wondering how in the world are these images mapped to all these different shapes and corners and faces and everything like that? And you may be wondering, where did they get this texture from to begin with? Well, before we get to that, let me show you what the node looks like as I select the mesh here. Let me turn on my overlays. There we go. The plane is really just one big mesh. So with it selected, we can go to the materials tab, and there's only two materials. There's one for the entire ship, and there's another one for the flames in the back. So let's go to the ship material, and it's just a basic PBR shader setup up here, where we've got the BSDF shader, and all the inputs are coming from different texture image maps that were pre-created by the artist. So nothing really fancy there, but let me show you what it looks like when the images are unwrapped and applied to this very, well, not very, but it's a complex mesh. It's not a soda can cylinder, it's not a cube. So in that regard, it's pretty dang complex. So let's shift over here and look at the UV editor screen. And we have this ridiculous mess of imagery right here. Let me actually switch to the albedo, which is another name for the color map or the diffuse map. There's about three different ways to call that. And it looks like chaos. But all of this is somehow magically wrapped onto this beautiful spaceship mesh. How is it mapped onto it so well? UV unwrapping. That is how. Let's tap into edit mode. And as you can see, with all the faces selected on the plane, all the faces up here are also selected because we have the sync arrows button turned on. And we're going to look at specific shapes here and where they map onto this crazy image. So to deselect all your faces, Alt A or Option A, and I'm just going to click on this large triangular shape here because it's a big shape. And we see it right here in the middle. So I'm going to press my period key to zoom in. I'm going to use my plus to zoom in even more. And I'm actually going to get out of edit mode so we can look what is right here, these shapes that we see on the plane. One, two, three, these kind of inset panels and a circle. And looky here, we have one, two, three, and an inset circle right there. So this triangle is represented here by this triangle shape, and it is basically capturing whatever is below it on this image texture and applying it to right there. So why are there multiple image maps and what do they all look like? Well, they look really similar, but they also look different. So let's go through each one and I'll show you what's going on. Albedo is the surface color. This is the emission. So these are little glowing pieces along the ship. Next is the metal map, similar but very dark and gray. Now, this is just a grayscale map because the brightness value is basically going to interpret into metallic values on how metallic or non-metallic those pieces are. Next, we've got the normals map, which gives the illusion of further detail without actually adding geometry and more meshes and more polygons to the ship. We are actually getting indentions and bumps and really more detailed shapes while saving processing power. Kind of like a bump map, but a little bit more complex. Next, we've got the roughness map, which is giving imperfections to the shininess because the spaceships, after a few reentries into atmosphere, after a few battles, they're not going to be pristine and polished and clean all the time. They're going to acquire imperfections and scratches and wear and tear and weathering. So that's what roughness is good for. And lastly, we've got the flame texture, which is just a flame, and that is mapped onto these long planes. If I go into edit mode, look at this. This is just a square. It's just a really long plane that actually gets narrow at the end. And there's another plane here. And that just gives a further illusion of volume to the flame without actually having to use flame simulations or volume. All great tricks for a faster and more efficient render. Now, as I zoom in and I really examine these details, this looks hand painted to me. And when I say hand painted, that means painted with a stylus, most likely, and usually using a program called Surface Painter. It's a really amazing program that allows you to digitally paint procedural textures as well as image textures and masking and things like that. You can paint it in real time onto a complex 3D mesh. And then once you're done painting your mesh, you can export the texture map, and then in whatever 3D program you want, you can apply it to your mesh. And it's really great for creating these multiple maps simultaneously, such as the roughness and the color and the normals and even highlights and other things like that, metallic and all that. And it just is a really great way to paint. As we move the camera slowly, you can see as the light goes across these surfaces, it's broken up. It's not a perfectly polished metallic surface, and that is because there is a roughness map that's breaking it up. If we look in right here, let me turn off the grid by turning off overlays. There we go. As we look on this edge, there's a kind of a directional scratching, which I think is genius because that is like atmosphere, and maybe some particles and dust and things like that hitting the wing over time and scratching it in that direction. And if we go to the metallic map, we can actually find how they painted that. So metallic and select these few faces. And if I period zoom into them and then get out of edit mode, we can see right here is all the scratching that was painted, probably by some brush similar to Photoshop brushes. So yeah, that is the gist of how image maps like this are used on complex meshes, and really they're being created in other programs. Now, Blender can do texture painting, but it's not great. I'm not really taking time to learn it right now because I feel like it doesn't quite have the tools that I want, and it is not very user friendly. I'm hoping that gets improved soon with more brushes and other features that Substance Painter and other programs have, because 3D texture painting is a really great way to bring your models to a new level. And let's say we've got a mesh created and we would like to texture paint onto it, or even just to add some simple things like decals, details, maybe some image textures, things like that. We can do that with any program such as Photoshop, GIMP, or even Krita. And the way to do that is you can export the UV map. So let's change this top view to the UV editor. And if I tab into edit mode, instantly we see that this icosahedrons triangles are already unmapped in a really nice horizontal manner. I like this way because the equator, which is along these dots, is straight. And generally, this is kind of a replacement for a sphere. I just like that orientation. Now, there are gaps here because this dot and this dot are actually connected up here at the pole. Let me select them all again. This dot and this dot also meet. These two dots meet. So there are gaps, and you'll run into this issue when you look more into globe maps of the Earth, because there are only so many ways you can unwrap a sphere to show on a flat piece of rectangular paper. There's pros and cons to each unwrapping method. So similar problems do apply to UV unwrapping because we are unwrapping, in this case, a spherical shape. So we've got our UV unwrapping done. We're going to say that we're happy with it and this is the way we want it. Now, to export it and use that in other programs, all you have to do is go to UV and export UV layout. Choose where you want to put it. I'm going to name this Icosa UV map, and by default it is a PNG, which is fine. Now, this is important. The size of your texture is going to limit you on how close in you can get to your final result with renders, and not see pixels. So 1024 is kind of the starting point for most textures these days. It's not high res at all. If you want to increase the resolution, just double that number, 2048 by 2048, because this texture, will keep it as a square for now, just to keep things simple. Now, if that's not enough and you really want to get in close, you can double that by going to 4096 by 4096. You can double that to going 9512. 9,000, I think that's what it is. That's where my math gets a little fuzzy, but I do know 4096 is double of 2048. So let's go back to 2048 by 2048. Fill opacity. I think that's how transparent the triangles are going to be in the UV map. So let's just put that at half and save. All right, so let's open up Photoshop and open up this UV map. We can paint onto it, save the result, and bring it back into Blender and stick it onto our shape here. And we've got this. So these are all the triangles faces that have been unwrapped. So what you want to do is make a new layer on top, and you can do your painting or adding image textures on top of this. In this case, I'm just going to add text so we can see it wrap around the shape. So I'm going to type, oh, I don't know, icosahedron of doom, and some exclamation points, of course. There we go. I'm going to color this red because, that's just more doomish. And I'm going to add a bottom solid layer of pure black. There we go. Now, if I export this, Control Shift S, and I'm going to name this, I don't know, image map. Save it as a JPEG because I don't really care about the quality right now. Okay, now I'm going to switch back over to Blender. And all I need to do is set up the nodes and it will apply to this UV mapping because we've already unwrapped it. So let's switch to the shader editor, create a new material, go up here, click on the BSDF shader and just press Control T or Command T on Mac. And Node Wrangler will do the rest by setting up those nodes. Now I'm just going to find that image I just made in Documents. There it is, really long file name. And voila, we're done. Now, if we just switch over to material preview, we should see it. There it is. And it's reversed for some reason. I don't know why. So really easy fix. Let's go back to the UV editor, go into edit mode, select all of the unwrapped triangles here. And we're going to scale them on the X axis, but we're just going to flip flop it. So S for scale, X for the horizontal axis, and type a -1, enter. There we go. So let me show you what this did. It just basically did kind of this number. And voila, we've got the icosahedron of doom. Cool. So that's the basics of kind of a rough form of texture painting. All right, let's talk about another form of texturing, which is procedural texturing. So procedural texturing, like I said earlier, is completely mathematically generated. It's endless. It never tiles. It never repeats. It never has resolution because it is all calculated down to the pixel based on, of course, your quality, size, and detail and things like that. So let's create a brick procedural texture for this wall. Click on New up here to make a material. Let's call it Brick Procedural. Boom. Scroll up by holding Alt, click, and dragging. And let's do Shift A, click on the search, and type in brick texture. Pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to change my views around so I can better control and see all these parameters. And also for you watching on screens, it should be easier. So switch this to shader editor. Get rid of this side panel by pressing in. Zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. Move this over here. Okay. So we got to plug in color of, this is a color output from the brick texture. Plug it into color input of the BSDF. Switch our view to material preview. And voila, we have a brick wall. No, we don't. So what's going on here? Well, here's a weird thing about the brick texture. It works like bricks. They're really only visible from one direction. So we're going to actually have to flip this cube, even though it's really, really annoying. So I'm just going to go RX90. Then I'm going to fix my scale. So scale it upwards on the Z axis and then thin it out this way on the Y axis. There we go. Now we have a brick wall. Not very interesting, but there's a lot of great controls here. Again, all completely procedurally. You can change how much the bricks are squished or stretched. You can increase the frequency of them. You've got color values, such as the mortar color, which is in between the bricks. And then you've got two color options. You've got the overall scale of the bricks. You've got how big the mortar is, whether it's really thick and chunky or really thin and narrow. You control which color gets more prominence, the first or second color, the width of the bricks, and of course, how high each row is. So lots of really great controls here. We're creating, large brick walls, which will be very taxing if you have image textures large enough to support the resolution of, a large brick house. If you're getting up close to that thing, you're going to want an 8K texture. And that gets pretty hefty on the memory usage. So that is awesome. Yay for procedural bricks. There are a number of other procedural textures. If you go to the texture, we've got brick, checkers, there's a magic texture, moose grave, noise, point density, sky, Voronoi, wave, and white noise. I just encourage you to make some flat planes and maybe some spheres and cubes and just play with each of these texture nodes for at least 30 minutes each, at least. And then do that every week and you will get really good and you'll learn to make some really cool stuff using what Blender has already given you. There's even a Facebook group devoted just to procedural textures for Blender, and the things that people make on this page are incredible. The node trees do get very complex, but you think about it, you are creating so much reality from literally numbers and nothing to begin with. There's no image textures used in a true procedural texture. So it's all generated, combined, using math and masks, using all kinds of nodes to create a variety of things that we see in the real world. And that stuff just really is interesting to me. And look at this node tree. It's just out of control. I guess he's like simulating the entire universe there. I don't know. It's probably going to become sentient soon and start rebelling. So I'm glad I'm not that deep into procedural textures. My favorite texture is probably the moose grave texture. because I use it for a lot of real world effects such as weathering and detail. I like to lower the dimension a little bit, and I'll usually overlay this actually over other image textures or other more basic procedural maps so that I can add, age and dirt or rust or corrosion. I've even used this for clouds and special effects elements as well. As with any node that is giving us an image data output, we can, of course, combine and mix the different sources of information. Here I'm mixing between a moose grave texture and a noise texture, which I'm going to use the factor version, which doesn't have any color. We go. We can increase the scale, the detail, how rough it is. Distortion is really fun to get some really cool, wavy, organic looking effects. You can also put these into 4D mode, which is a new feature that was added a few versions ago, which allows you to scale this noise through 3D space. What do I mean by that? Well, watch as I slide the W slider. This thing really appears to be moving and animated in an organic way. And you can easily animate any of these parameters, by the way, automatically or manually with keyframes. Similarly with the moose grave texture over here, if I slowly holding shift, drag the W slider, we see the noise begin to evolve and move. And there are so many possibilities with that alone. It just really is fun to play with. We can mix them, between the two. We can layer them in screen mode or multiply mode. And it's just really fun to be able to add these slight touches of reality to your models. So definitely check into procedural textures if any of this interests you, because there's a lot of power there in Blender. Okay, I may have mentioned PBR shaders and image texture maps before. Let me explain real quickly how that works. I do have an entire video devoted to this, but I'm just going to cover this really quickly so you kind of understand the concept. And that way, when it comes up, or if you want to dive into it later, you're not completely confused and unsure of what's going on. So I'm going to select my mesh, create a new texture, go up here, and with the BSDF shader selected, I'm going to press Control Shift T, which again is a node wrangler trick, and I'm going to find my image texture maps, which I have in a folder called PBR. So PBR stands for physically based render, which is basically when a substance is captured with multiple images to create the final result. Here's a cool one right here. So there are 5 images, and you'll notice that they all look very similar with square designs and dirty rust, but they all have different values and colors. That's because the different elements of a shader, such as ambient occlusion, diffuse, displacement, normals, and specular maps, all require different types of values, and depending on what the texture is or the material is going to be, they have to have different values in different places. So with all these images selected, I'm going to press the Principled Texture Setup button, and the Node Wrangler will take care of the rest for me. Look at this. It's automatically mapped all these 4 image textures to where they need to be plugged into. I'm going to move things around a little bit to make it a little bit easier to see. Sorry, 5 image textures. Now I'm going to go into my material preview so I can actually see what's happening here. Now it's getting stretched here, and over here the squares are really large. So let's switch over to our UV editor, tab into edit mode, select all, press U for unwrap, and let's just do Smart UV unwrap and click OK. Now I need to zoom out to see what's going on here. And here are all of our squares. Not too bad. Could be a little bit better placement because some of these squares are a little offset, a little bit crooked. Let's go back to our node setup and let's look at where these images are being plugged into. This one right here, I'm going to preview by pressing Control Shift and click. This is just the surface color itself. There's kind of a mix of red, blue, and black and white, and that's plugged into base color, of course. The next one is the metallic map, which is going to be grayscale, and there's barely any dark values, which means this is mostly a very metallic substance. That's why it was in my metal folder. Next one down is the specular, which is telling us how strong these specular highlights are going to be shining off of the surface based on these dark and white values. Next down here is the normals map, which gives us an illusion of height and bump to these shapes, and it's going to further simulate light, bouncing off in different directions to give us that illusion of shape. And then finally, the displacement map, which if we have this turned on correctly, it will literally distort the mesh, but I don't like to do that. I actually like to combine the normals and the displacement map as a bump map. So I'll show you how to do that. With the normals map here, I'm going to press Shift A, search, and type in bump. Put this right in here in between the normals map and the normal input, and then plug in your displacement into height. And by the way, I'm still previewing this displacement map. So I'm going to Control Shift click this and get back into our normal viewing mode. Go back down and turn down the strength to maybe 0.5 on the bump node because when they're both up at 1, it's just way too much. All right, so let's zoom in really close and see what's going on here. As I move my camera angle, you can see the light is changing how it reflects. And there is some reflection of itself onto the metal. But it's not a perfect glossy reflection like I mentioned with that spaceship model. It's broken up by the textures that are being applied to these faces. All right, moving on, but coming back to this amazing spaceship, I'm going to show you how to use multiple images in different places on the same mesh. So first, let's go to the shader editor up here and let's get things set up. I'm going to add my own logo onto the wing or somewhere on this spaceship. Now we've already got all these image textures, plugged in. So how can we insert another image to be in place of or really on top of this current image? Because remember, all the stuff that's showing up on this mesh is literally an image chopped up and being, located kind of like GPS and placed perfectly in place on each individual, piece of the mesh. Let's add another image node, image right there. Click open, and I'm going to find my own personal logo. Just type in logo on the search bar up here. Now, I just so happen to have a PNG version of it, which has no background behind it. It has a transparent layer to it, and that's important because if you have an image that is filled in completely with no transparency, when you apply it to your mesh, it's going to have the corners. It's going to have a background color, but this will not because there is no background color. So I'm going to click Open Image. That also means that this PNG, it does have an alpha channel, which means I can use this alpha as a mask. So what does that mean? I'm about to show you, and it's really not that complicated. So I'm going to press Shift A, type in Mix RGB, which just allows you to mix two RGB signals, which, this is an image, it's RGB information. Up here as well, grab the color and plug it into here. Okay, now let's see what happens as we play with this mix. My logo, I think, is being applied to the entire mesh, and it's just making it black, which is kind of weird. But we need to use UVs to tell us exactly where to place my logo and where not to place it. So to do that, we're actually going to use two UV maps on the same mesh, which is generally what you need to do when you're using two separate images, because they're not going to have the same UV unwrapping data. So to do that, go to this triangle, which is Object Data Properties, go to UV Maps, and press plus to make a new one. I'm going to name this Logo UV Map, just so I know for sure what it is. Okay, now to plug that in up here, just go to Shift A, click Search, and type in UV, and there it is, the UV Map node. Plug the UV data, which is purple, which is not RGB information like the yellow ones are. Plug it in there to vector. Now we need to select Logo UV Map. Awesome. Okay, now we're ready to unwrap this spaceship to the new UV map that we made so that my logo shows up where I want it. So I'm actually going to put it on the side of the plane over here. And let's turn off our grid and let's turn off our floor because it's just annoying. I don't need a floor grid with a spaceship. It doesn't really make sense. I'm going to hit number 3 to get a flat side view. That's important because I want my logo to be printed on the side here, flat, right? And we're going to use that unwrap from view trick that I showed earlier with the cube and the walls to just make it easier. So go into edit mode. We're going to expand this view over here to show the UV map. Now we're still in the first UV map, which is the one that came with the ship made by the artist. So I'm going to switch to logo UV unwrap. That is so important. I have screwed up a lot of hard work with a one UV map when I thought I was editing a new one or another one. So first check your UV map. We're here and this looks just like the other one. That's okay. Next thing we need to do is make sure that we're seeing the correct image in the background. So switch here to DG logo in this case, or whatever image you want to add. Could be a stamp, could be a skull and crossbones, maybe like, scratches for each kill they've got. And I'm going to select all with A, and I'm going to actually shrink this into nothingness. I'm going to make all of these polygons, microscopic. But here's the trick. I'm going to place this somewhere where there is no texture in a completely transparent section, right? I'll put it in the middle of this diamond because why not? But I want to put my logo right here in the middle of all these. So I'm going to select these faces just like this. And I'm going to press U and then unwrap from view. And here it is. Now remember, this is only grabbing these polygons out of this all microscopic, spaceship over here of faces, now these are large and they're in their correct, orientation and size. So if I size this up and give it enough room to show my logo, it should show up if I have things set up correctly. Now I don't see it here, so let's check out our nodes and make sure things are set up correctly. Oh yeah, I need to use the alpha channel here as the mask. So let's plug that in here. And look at that. All the faces that I have selected, which is these guys, have my logo, but it is repeating. Now to stop an image from repeating, into infinity on the outside borders of your image, just find the image node that is repeating and change this repeat to clip. And it will clip on the outside and it will not repeat anymore. And voila, oh, look at that. I mapped it onto a piece with some depth. Oops. We can also map it other places. We're not just limited to one mapping. So let's put it on this dirty wing right here. Go into edit mode, select this piece and this piece just in case. Let's go to an above view by pressing number 7. U, unwrap from view. And let's go back to our UV editor. And here it is. This is our wing piece. Let's make it pretty big because this is a very narrow piece. And you can automatically see in the preview down below, we are placing the logo on the wing based on these faces of the mesh. Pretty cool. Now, if I want to rotate it around a center point, if I do rotate, it kind of rotates from the middle of the faces. That doesn't really help me. So I'm going to click right in the middle. And look at that. We have a cursor, not a 3D cursor like over here, but a 2D cursor. So we can actually rotate around the 2D cursor by using that and then R. And look at that. Now we can kind of line it up if you want to be really OCD about it. And that is great. I can just brand the heck out of this spaceship so that, whenever it's attacking enemy forces, at least I'm getting some product placement and some exposure. You can use this trick for adding labels and stickers and decals to other meshes, such as a soda can. All right, and lastly, to close out this tutorial, just like we did multiple images on one material, we can do multiple materials on one mesh. I showed it earlier in the video, but let me go into more depth here. So I'm going to make a base texture, which is going to be a metallic kind of frame. Let's make it like a dark metal. I'll go to material preview mode. I always forget to do that. Let's make it a high specular and a low roughness, so it's very shiny. Ooh, pretty. Let's tab into edit mode and switch to face mode so that all the faces are selected. If they're not, press the letter A. Press I a second time. Now we're insetting all the triangle faces. And we've got that. I like that thickness. Click to confirm or press the enter button. And then let's go to the extrude normals, extrude along normals, and let's extrude them inwards. There we go. Now let's make our second material up here. Click plus, click new. Let's change this BSDF to an emission. So if you click on this mini, just press the letter E, and it'll automatically switch to an emission. And let's make this emission like a sky blue. Turn this up to 10, so it's pretty bright. And now we need to click assign because right now everything is still dark metal. With this material selected and all these triangles still selected, click assign and whoa, we got this bright glowing crazy thing. Press I again to make another inset. Click OK and make a third material. Click new. And let's make this maybe kind of a darkish blue, again metal with a little bit less specular and a higher roughness. Click assign. And there we go. We've got this complex icosahedron mesh with multiple materials mapped to different faces. I'm going to add a quick floor here, move it down, make it really big with a low roughness value. And we get that cool kind of Apple product, reflective product photography ground piece there. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video and got something out of it. I know UV unwrapping, materials, and textures can be kind of an intimidating topic to tackle if you're new to Blender, but I hope that this video kind of helps sort out some of the terminology and the techniques used to give images textures and UV maps. So if you learned something new, if I helped clear up some confusion, please let me know down in the comments. I love to get some feedback from my viewers. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe so I know you guys like what I'm making, and that will encourage me to make more great content. Well, as always, thanks for watching and have a great week.